think first off, me being up here, first of all, is a bit nerve-wracking, just to say that, right? I mean, I'm looking at you guys and you folks, some of whom have careers that are literally longer than I've been alive. I'm 26 years old. And when Dr. Lin says, it'd be great for you to come and learn, I'm like, yes, I'm all about that. It'd be great for you to also talk about what you're doing. I'm going, okay, what can I talk about? And so I've adapted, I know Mike, you're keeping time, adapted this from my it's a keynote I used to give. It takes about 15 minutes. I've shrunk that down, hopefully to 15. We'll see how this goes. But really what I want to get at is first an overview, okay, about industries, not just the education industry, but industries in general and the use of data. Then I want us to dive into really the K-12 market. I'm looking from a lens of practicality, okay? I'm not an educator. In fact, my background is in technology. I'm a computer science, studied computer science at the University of Waterloo. So I very much look at it from that lens. You might be wondering why am I in education? Well, it turns out, my teachers were really not only just my mentors or my friends, and they were the ones that really got me down this path. And boy, did I start looking into it and realized, holy cow, there's a lot I can do here. So that's where I want to start. And to give you just a brief idea about what Chalk does, it turns out we started helping out those teachers, my own teachers, and it turns out there's a lot of, let's just say, unfortunate tools that were made a long time ago that doesn't really resonate with teachers. So started making out really simple things in the beginning, like a lesson planner, a assessment tool, and eventually realized that while those are great and teachers loved using them, what the key to Chalk was actually about connecting the dots in academics. And for us, it wasn't just let's provide point solutions to everybody. For us, it was how can we provide tools that are delightful for teachers to use, and at the same time gather enough information to inform people, right, in every stakeholder. I'm not talking just teachers, principals, administrators, parents, everybody in this ecosystem, insights about what is going on. And I'll dig into this later on and talk about the types of data. We finally categorized them into 6 types of data with the help of industry experts. Because there's a lot, right? You can think about curriculum. We're here unpacking the curriculum, aligning that to standards, and really getting granular, right? George, you were talking about curriculum today is not granular. Well, how can we help districts to do that? Well, once you have that, it turns out you can now start to align a curriculum to an instruction. Understand when that is taught, and now you can align that with an assessment. Understand how effective this curriculum is, right? So again, I'm coming from a very practical angle, okay? So just some numbers, since we've launched 21 million lessons delivered, 6 million assessments taken, but really getting down to brass tacks is about working with the educators, because at the end of the day, I'm here to learn. Every day I'm learning, okay? Every day I'm shocked at how things are done. First time I went in to talk about curriculum, I'm going, hold on, this binder full of stuff is your curriculum. How do you know what teachers are teaching? You don't. And it's really, this is what's driving me. Okay, so let's get into the meat of the matter. Again, starting from the industry approach, data is in our daily lives. Okay, it's actually frankly used in more places than you think. Some cases is pretty scary. So quickly step through this. We all came, to this place by what? By GPS, Google Maps, right? All of this traffic information, guess what? You've provided because you've used that product, and as you're driving, you are providing data points, right? Another map, right? This one is the satellite information, right? Why is it important? Well, it turns out financial firms use this to track how many cars are parked at Walmart. So they understand, are people actually going to Walmart, and how is that going to affect the stock price, okay? Netflix recommendation. Data is huge in this, right? I mean, this is essentially personalizing what you want and giving you what you want to watch. Not only that, though, on the flip side, they're selling this information to people so that we know what shows to make for you, okay? So data is very prevalent. Starbucks. So I grew up in Vancouver, actually. And I recall on one street we had like 3 Starbucks. And yet somehow, all these Starbucks were actually, they had a lot of customers and a lot of businesses, right? People were going to them. I'm going, well, this makes no business sense. Turns out, before they open anything, they look at the traffic information, the data, people, how many people are going to go to these locations, and they make those decisions on data, right? FDA recently approved this AI, diagnosis, right? Diagnosis system. Again, utilizing data to get to, I think it was 80% accuracy, which was on par with actually doctors' diagnosis. Financial transactions, moment you swipe your credit card, right? Hundreds of variables or features in computer science people run through, understand how these are interpreted. And really, when I look at this, this is just the beginning. And I'm, setting education aside, every other industry is talking about data. And that pace of change is increasing. Again, folks before me in the presentation have talked about how that change is increasing. Over 50% of companies are now adopting big data, right? And these are you can think about, these are the Fortune 500s, right? They're really thinking about how can I use these. And as Bob Dylan says, at times they are changing, right? So when I look at how we think about time and change, and I think you alluded to this, it used to be linear, but that pace of adoption, that pace of change is ever increasing. And I promise I'll get to education in just a bit. But starting with the telephone, it took 75 years to reach 50 million people. It took airlines 68 years to reach 50 million people. This is actually a great indicator of what the reach is. Electricity, 46 years, TV, 14 years, cell phone, 12 years. I think you get the drift. Internet, 4 years, Facebook, 3 years, Twitter, 2 years. Pokemon Go, 19 days, to reach 50 million people. Okay, so I don't know, does this resonate? I mean, Pokemon Go, if you see people running around at Poké Gym, right? Like this is my generation, I'll just tell you that, right? Like this is what we do, and this is, the pace of adoption is forever increasing. Everybody's got a cell phone, a smartphone, or just a phone as we call it. And they're using stuff like this. And so when I look at, okay, well, what about education, right, to bring this back? And I contrast the conversations I have with superintendents, with curriculum folks, right? That is increasing, but where is that leaving us, right? So the pace of ed tech has increased as well. I call it ed tech. I call this ed tech, right? Slide rule, 1600s, magic lantern, 1700s, right? Projection, chalk and slate, not related to chalk here. 1800s, calculator, right? Mechanical calculator. Overhead projectors, 1930s. Scantron, actually was surprised. I was saying, I use this in my high school days, right? 1970s. And finally, you get to interactive whiteboards, iPads, all these one-to-one technologies. And that has only happened really in the last, couple decades, right? And so, not to be understated, that is also increasing. But I think the question that was raised yesterday was, we got all this infrastructure now in place. What the heck do we do with it? What do we do with them, right? What do we do with the technology that is in our classroom? And I'm going to answer that from a data perspective because for me, just sort of sidebar conversation, the human condition and human factor is hugely important in the classroom. It's the reason I'm here. I'm greatly thankful of my own teachers. So yes, I'm a technologist, but at the same time, when I think about this whole thing, I am thinking from a perspective of what information and what data can I provide to my teachers and really the educators, the administration, parents even. And that's really what I want to get at. And so when we've laid out, right, we have our applications, we have our platform, we gather curricular information, we gather assessment information, we gather all sorts of information. And when I started looking at data that's also not in our platform, because we want to, in order to understand and actually give a meaningful insight, we kind of also need to pull from other sources. We said, well, we should actually start to categorize the types of data in education. This is really, I think, the meat of the matter, right? Understanding the differences and the collection of data, and I'm going to talk also a bit about the pitfalls and the challenges that are up ahead. This is really the 6 buckets that we've laid out, right? And again, this is, we didn't just fully come up with this. This is other folks, right? Experts in the industry. We said, what are these different? I think if you ask me, chalk is great at, I would say, curriculum instruction, right? Maybe a bit of achievement, but we really hit home on the curriculum instruction side. We don't do any of these other ones, right? So what did each one of these buckets mean? When we look at perception data, this is really about surveys, feedback, anecdotes, observations, okay? And I don't mean These are the methods to gather your grades or tests. We'll get to that in a bit. Perception data is literally a survey to a student, a survey to a body, asking about anything that there is, right? So this is not related to your achievement, not related to your curriculum, not related to really anything. Maybe it's how your school's operating, right? Curriculum, I think this one is, people are fairly familiar with this one. Unfortunately, I can say that we're working with a lot of school districts. There are still a lot of misconceptions here, right? The data that you can gather here, if you break it down to really its core, is you can start to granularize the learning target, because after you've unpacked a lot of this, you can start to understand what the standards are. You can understand how does one grade flow into the next, and you can understand how even the assessments are associated, right? And this seems like really trivial. But when we go and talk to school districts, they're saying, yeah, this is all in binders. I have no idea how this aligns. I think I've covered all my bases. And the question that we ask that dumbfounds them all is, we ask, well, how does this stuff that you're doing here flows into your eventual state assessment? And they go, I don't know, right? And maybe that's not the right question, because again, the utopian in me is saying, well, we shouldn't be learning for a state assessment, but hey, that's reality, right? This is what I'm trying to say is, I'm giving you a practical approach, because these are the questions that the school districts are asking for, right? So the curricular data, great, and you can start to see some of these, again, what we call features, what we call data points, because these are going to start to correlate with things like instruction data. What are the lesson plans? When are they planned? What are the teaching schedules? Resources that are associated, learning targets, right? Just with those two pieces of data alone, we've been able to tell school districts to say, yeah, that curriculum, that unit of instruction that you thought was only 7 days, that particular unit, turns out across your entire school body, school system, it took twice that time. And you wonder why at the end of a semester your math curriculum or whatnot runs out of time, your scores are down. So let's actually tackle that ahead of time, right? We're saying, let me give you that information now so that we can address that. We can shift things around if need be, right? Because the perception so far is, yeah, it's perfect. We don't need to do anything about it. And we don't know what the teachers are teaching, right? So again, instructional data is hugely important. There's plenty of them, of course. Next part is achievement data. I think this is really one that districts have been good at in one part of it, grades, for example, right? Standards, competencies, formative, now that's what people are talking about, right? Yesterday I mentioned product, process, and progress. Again, not a new concept. But here's the thing, right? We're not tracking any of that. Those data points are completely lost. I've talked to teachers that use, you all familiar with the program called Evernote, right? You make your notes on it, right? And I'm saying, well, how are you tracking your students? And she's saying, well, obviously all the summative evaluations, I put that in my grade book, but for all the formative and observations, I create an Evernote notebook for every one of my students, and I put their stuff in there. And I'm going, holy cow, that's a lot of work for you. Not only that, that data is not going anywhere, okay? That's a reality of on the ground, right? I mean, we can talk about great visions and everything, but at the end of the day, that's a reality. And for me, as an entrepreneur, is how do you bridge that gap between what is happening today in that reality to that utopian world that we all want to create, okay? So, obviously, I think I alluded to yesterday, tech can play a role here in mitigating that and hopefully collecting not just the product, but also the process and progress. Demographic, pretty obvious here, right? A lot of this is captured in a lot of what we traditionally call student information systems, right? Age, genders, ethnicity, socioeconomic. And lastly, I think one that's missed is environmental, right? There's controllable data there, that, class size, budget, tooling, bus routes, and there's uncontrollable ones like fire or tornado, right? Also known as really acts of gods. So why is this all important? Why do you want to break it down? Well, if you have everything here, then you can start to really make true correlations, right? True correlations that allows you to understand the true insights, because sometimes we may see a blip, but that doesn't mean anything. It just means that that student had, not such a great day, so to speak, at home, right? So really, this is where I think educators are starting to go on this journey, but I would just caution a lot, right? So Portland Public, they realized their first challenge was interoperability when they said, hey, let's gather everything together. I think we heard, if you were here yesterday, you heard that from Houston ISD. Lenny also talked about this. Huge problem, okay? See, for most people, they think that 80% of the brain power is spent on data analysis. And 80% of the work is we gotta hire amazing folks who build these crazy models, algorithms, to analyze and correlate data. That's not the truth. In fact, it's actually the easier part of the equation. Lenny yesterday said technology is the easy part. The hard part is not only culturally getting together, but having all the systems talking to each other. Okay, that interoperability is huge. School district we talked to in Arkansas, we have 200 software solutions. None of them talk to each other. You can start to understand those buckets that I've outlined, right? 6 buckets that I've outlined. Within each bucket, you start to see software solutions, and none of them talk to each other, right? So this is the CIO from Portland Public said, we need to start thinking about interoperability integration early in that selection process and weighing in as a significant factor, right? In the same way we would weigh student privacy and security. This could not be understated. The toughest thing, and this is me as a computer scientist speaking now, the toughest thing in really getting to that holy grail is, sure, data analysis is hard, but really getting everything together. And that, I can't understand how important that is, because joining all this system will take time, okay? From a practical standpoint, people are making headway. There are projects like Project Unicorn that tries to define a common standard, but it will take time, period. Okay? Charters, okay, so different audience. New Vision's famously put out this thing, and they said, we invested $8 million with 26 staff on this data team. To which I say that's fantastic, because their entire mind shift culture is to roll around data, right? Defines their strategy, allows us to personalize the customer, customize supports schools and students. But then I turn around and say, well, I don't know any school district that has $8 million to spend in building a new data team. And that is, the question then becomes scalability. And I think you mentioned scaling personalization. That's going to be our number 2 challenge, is how do we make this, if we went into one district and connected everything, wonderful, we got an amazing case study, we got something that's working for tons of students. How do we then take that to other districts? How can we even ensure that other districts will want that? Because everybody seems to want their own homegrown solution. Okay? Number 2 challenge. So lastly, when I think about pitfalls, and this is what we've started to realize when we work with educators and administrators, nothing to be laughed at. It's suicide by hanging and strangulation and suffocation. But this is a correlation to U.S. spending on science-based and technology. Perfectly correlated. I think we can all understand that this is not, what I'm trying to show is that there's no causation. It shouldn't even be correlated to begin with, right? And when we think about data, people say, yeah, go look at the data. Nobody looks at the data. Everybody looks at visualizations. And so this is one of the probably most common pitfalls, where we find even schools and districts having built out these amazing dashboards, and I've said, we've got everything going. When we start drilling in a little bit and say, well, where's that data coming from? What are the parameters there? And everything starts falling apart because the pie charts and the graphs look nice at the end of the day, but it really needs to tell a complete picture. And again, it goes back to not just having one component of data, but having all. Interoperability, I talked a lot about that. We beat that dead horse. Privacy is obviously the next big concern, given what's happening in the world with their social networks. Huge topic that we touched on, this group has touched on, I think yesterday. But the challenge for, I think, companies and researchers, and I mean, in effect, I think people here understand what happened with Facebook, right? In effect, they had a program where they allowed researchers to gain access. I mean, it was well built out, but it was abused, right? So who's at fault, right? Who's at fault? And that's, that's not even student data, right? That's not even student information. So now we're talking about something even more elevated. How do we think about that? Frankly, I don't have a solution. But I think it's one thing that is going to be a big dramatic roadblock. And lastly, this is from the movie Big Short. Great movie. When I think about folks that, it talks about the financial crisis, right, 2008. And it talks about these group of people who saw it coming. There is a humongous distinction between lagging indicators and leading indicators. A lot of what I think even districts that profess, oh, we have great data, we have the systems in place. What we've learned is, and this is what we challenge them with their thinking is, are those really leading indicators, or is that just your final report at the end of the school year? Because if we're not all about leading indicators, we're not doing anything for the students because they're already gone for the next year. In fact, they may have already gone for college and university or elsewhere. So how do we fix it before it even begins? Leading indicators is probably one of the hardest things. You think about, again, I go back to grades a lot. That's at the end of that's a product at the end already. So, just one of those pitfalls to think about because people seem to have this conception of, I got my graph, I got my stats. It's telling me what's happening now, not the future, right? So how do we then correlate those type of questions? So I'm coming from a cautiously optimistic viewpoint. I think there's a lot of, I'm proposing to you is a lot of questions, a lot of topics, right? I don't have the answers to all of them. I think, for us at Chong, we like to talk a lot about curriculum construction, aligning all of those. We like to think that we're at least a bit more knowledgeable. I think there's a lot for us to still learn from this group and beyond, right? But if we were to do this, if we were to really paint this vision of AI and data and all this greatness, we have to address some of these things because otherwise it's just utopian, right? It's just, there's such a disconnect when I talk to district, even yesterday talking to Lenny, there's so much disconnect, there's such a big gap in the understanding between K-12 to college, university, to the labor market, between academics, to companies, to educators on the ground, right? So really trying to involve all the stakeholders and having productive conversation, I think that's going to be the key. So thank you, and this is really my view and really the challenge I'm posing to everybody in this room because you all clearly have a lot of experience. Thank you.